Hi, this is Heather Jerome from heatherjerome.com and from the Sonatas and Partitas.com. This is the second video about the double Presto. It's the double to the B minor Corrente from the first partita in B minor. In the first video, I talked about some alternate fingerings that you could use in this Presto that were different from the ones published in the book. And in this video, what I want to do is just give you some practice tips that will hopefully help you play it as fast as you like and as musically as you'd like. So the Presto has two things that jump out at me right away. The first, it's kind of obvious. It's in perpetual 16th note motion with a lot of scales, and then it goes to another passage of arpeggio scales. In that way, it's pretty simple to talk about. And the other thing about the Presto is how closely it's actually matched to the Corrente, because the bass line matches exactly. Sometimes it's on a slightly different beat, but the whole bass line is there. And it's really interesting to compare it. But on the other hand, it has a completely different feel. And the way I look at the Corrente is that I see it as being a really heartfelt, very vocal, very lyrical. It reminds me of what Bach said, that even for his non-church music, everything that he wrote was for the glory of God. And whether or not you're religious, I can see this Corrente as just embodying all of humanity, all the mysteries of nature, all the pleading, the hope, the sadness, the joy. Like, it's just all in there. And the Presto, on the other hand, the Presto just has attitude. And I think the Presto, as just being a piece, it's just like way cool. And so there's this like really different feel to both of the pieces. And that goes way back, because starting from way back, there were the Greeks and they sang their stories. And then the next basic thing that we know about is there was music in the churches, and the churches were so big and reverberant that the music had to be canted for the words to be heard. And sometime soon after that, we start to see very simple dance music written out. And what we had the dances were always in pairs. And the first of them was a slow dance. And then the second was the same dance played at double the speed. And that second dance was called the double. So I think that Bach, in his Sonatas and Partitas here, with the partitas and this first partita, he's actually, really paying homage to this ancient tradition. For those of you who have an edition of our book, in the final proofing, there's something that passed us by, and that was in this piece. Like the Corrente, every second bar is only supposed to be a half bar. So you can see after the pickup note, there's a full bar, and then after measure one, it's half bar, and then a full bar, and it alternates like that. So the piece goes basically in 2-bar segments. But you can also look at each 2-bar segment as being a question and an answer. And really, every bar tells a completely different story. Like, measure 1 goes down, measure 2 goes up. Measure 3 says this, measure 4 says that. Question, answer, statement, retort, the whole way through. And I don't know if Bach was thinking about that when he wrote this piece, but actually it's the perfect setup composed right inside the piece to help people practice it, to actually build up the speed and the endurance to just keep playing in steady 16th notes at a Presto speed, because you can practice it one measure at a time and repeat it as many times as you like. And when you're building up your speed, you're not going to be just like ripping through it from the beginning to the end, but you can play a measure 5 times, 10 times in a row at a certain speed and see if you can do it or not. And if you can't, well, either you slow your metronome down, or you figure out if there's a problem with either you need to change your fingering or you need to be more relaxed. It'll show you your problems. But what I tell my students before they do that is that they should be able to play it first in 8th notes, then in 16th notes, somewhere between 50 and 80, just at a moderate speed, solid, easily, confidently, and just get to know it very well before starting to play it faster. And the other thing is to know what your right hand is doing. Yes, work out your right hand fingerings, but also, and especially, is know what your thumb is doing when your thumb isn't playing. Now, when I studied with Scott Tennant, he used to get me to play all my pieces right hand alone, and it was always very helpful. And so I did that also when I was learning this piece, and it was extremely helpful. It showed me some problems that I was going to run into before I ran into them. And what I also did when I was working out my right hand fingering is to plan out, and I wrote it out in the score, every single place where my thumb would be when it wasn't playing. So for the opening, the first note that your thumb has to play is the A sharp on the 6th string. So I started with my thumb there, and then as soon as that note was played, the next note to be played was on the 5th string. So my thumb went directly there afterwards. And the next note after the 5th string was the 4th string, so my thumb went directly there. And I wrote the whole thing in the score. And that was really good. It definitely got me playing it very solid. But there came a point where I couldn't get any faster using my thumb that way. And so I experimented and found that for me it worked better to actually usually keep my thumb 1 or 2 strings under my fingers and just sort of follow up with my thumb, following on the strings. That's what worked for me. But again, when I was playing the section with the runs, that held me up. It was just too much frantic changing strings with my thumb all the time. And so at the bottom of the runs, I did the last 2 strings with my thumb just kind of resting against my fingers in a sort of fake security blanket is what it felt like. But that's what worked for me. So I'm not suggesting by any means that anyone do what I did, but I am definitely suggesting that you to know what your thumb is doing when it's not playing. And I'm also suggesting to be willing to experiment, be willing to do things that are going to push you against a wall and figure out what the problem is and get over the problem. Sometimes learning a piece like this, it's a little bit like snakes and ladders. You have to be willing to go 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, 3 forward, 2 back, and just gradually take your time and trust it that you will get to where you want to be with it. And again, it's important to let yourself hit a wall. It's a wall is not a dead end. A wall is just something showing you where you need to work next. So another thing you're going to want to do with a metronome is put it faster than what your hoped for speed is and play it in dotted rhythms. That way, every second note you play is going to be faster than what you want to play, and every other second note you play is going to be slower than you want to play. And most people find it easier to have a lot more stamina if they're playing in dotted rhythms. So you could conceivably have your metronome pretty fast and play the whole thing with the repeats in a dotted rhythm without really tiring out your hand. So that's a good way to build up the stamina. But then there is going to come a point where you have to get rid of the metronome. And if you've been using it a lot, it is going to feel like the loss of a big security. But the fact is, you do want to play this piece with a certain amount of elasticity. You want to let it speak. It has to be like a conversation. You don't want it to sound as if you're doing a run like the devil crazy metronome exercise. So one thing that Frescobaldi said is that in passages with runs, it's nice to actually slow down a bit when you get to the top of the run. And his word was linger a bit on the top note. And the violinists who play this, that I really like listening to, they do that a little bit. It's subtle, but it does work. And that also works to help you, like when you're sort of letting up at the top, you can just make sure that you're totally physically relaxing, and then you rip off the bottom of the scale and just like totally relax, like at each end of the scale and at the end of each bar, like you've been practicing doing. If you've been doing it a bar at a time, you do a bar, and you completely relax. You do a bar, completely relax. And then when you're stringing the whole thing together, you've got that built in, like at the end of every bar, you can completely relax. And that'll help you in the long run to have the stamina to pull the whole thing off at the speed that you like. So enjoy, practice it wisely. As always, let us know what you think at sonatasandpartitas.com.